Africa, the continent sitting on over 30% of the world's mineral reserves: cobalt, gold, diamonds, oil, lithium. A continent with the youngest population on Earth, the most arable land per capita, and some of the fastest growing cities in human history. And yet, the poverty doesn't stop. Why? Today, we're going to follow the money. And what you find may be the most important story you've never been told. It starts in the early 1980s. African nations had just won their independence, many of them barely 2 decades old. They borrowed money to build roads, schools, hospitals. But then the global economy shook. Oil prices spiked, interest rates soared, and debt repayments began swallowing entire national budgets. So they did what any struggling country would do. They went to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank for help. What they got in return had a name: Structural Adjustment Programs, SAPs. These were packages of conditions attached to every loan: cut government spending, privatize state companies, remove trade barriers, let foreign capital flow freely. The IMF called it the Washington Consensus, shaped by the US Treasury, the IMF, and the World Bank, all headquartered, as it happens, in Washington, D.C. SAPs were imposed on over 40 African countries throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The results? Governments stopped subsidizing food and healthcare. School fees appeared. Hospitals charged for medicine. State industries, often the only employers in entire regions, were sold off. In a single decade, an entire generation of African social infrastructure was dismantled on the orders of foreign economists who had never lived there. They gave us the loan with one hand and took the future with the other. Kenyan economist. $3.6 billion. In 2024, protests erupted across Kenya over IMF-backed tax hikes linked to a $3.6 billion loan program. Young Kenyans stormed parliament. Many African countries under IMF programs recover from immediate collapse, but fare poorly in the long term. The medicine keeps the patient breathing. It doesn't cure the disease. Now, here's something they don't teach in economics class. 14 African nations, home to over 180 million people, are today using a currency created by France in 1945. It is called the CFA franc, and it is still, in 2025, pegged to the euro and managed under French oversight. Under the original arrangement, member countries were required to deposit 50% of their foreign currency reserves into the French treasury, plus an additional 20% for financial liabilities. That means these nations kept only 30% of their own earnings inside their own borders. 30% Franc nations retained only 30% of their own foreign currency reserves within their borders. 70% flowed outward to Paris. Senegal's president, elected in 2024, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, ran partly on a platform to dismantle this system. On the streets of Dakar, a coffee vendor named Birahim Diallo put it plainly: "When I see the CFA, I see my colonizer." In the 1960s, when the president of Mali tried to leave the CFA zone and create the Malian franc, his neighboring CFA countries immediately raised trade barriers and isolated his economy. A few years later, the Togolese president who planned a similar escape was assassinated. When a currency system comes with that kind of history, perhaps it was never designed to help. Now here is the number that should make your jaw drop. Every single year, an estimated $88.6 billion, roughly 3.7% of Africa's entire GDP, leaves the continent as illicit capital flight. That figure comes from UNCTAD, the United Nations trade body. To put it in context, that is nearly as much as all foreign aid and foreign investment Africa receives in a year, combined. $836 billion. Total illicit capital flight from Africa between 2000 and 2015. Africa's total external debt at the same time? $770 billion. The continent was a net creditor to the world.
Most of that money was leaving through what economists call trade misinvoicing, when mining companies, oil firms, or exporters deliberately underreport the value of what they're shipping out, so they pay less tax and hide profits in offshore accounts. Of the $40 billion drained annually through extractive commodities alone, 77% was concentrated in the gold supply chain. In African countries with high illicit outflows, governments spend 25% less on health and 58% less on education than comparable low-outflow countries. UNCTAD 2020. South Africa lost an average of $7.4 billion per year between 2010 and 2014. Nigeria lost $2.2 billion in a single year, equal to 4% of the government's total revenue. Those aren't statistics. Those are children who grow up without teachers and mothers who die in childbirth because there's no medicine. The DRC sits on $24 trillion worth of untapped minerals. It remains one of the poorest countries in the world. Here's the cruelest part of the system. Africa is primarily allowed to sell raw materials, cobalt, cotton, cacao, crude oil, at low prices set by global commodity markets it does not control. Then, those same raw materials are processed and manufactured in Europe, Asia, or America, and sold back to Africa at high prices. A cocoa farmer in Ivory Coast, the world's largest cocoa producer, earns a fraction of a cent for the chocolate bar that sells for $3 in a European supermarket. Exporting raw materials is exporting jobs, a luxury Africa cannot afford. UN Economic Commission for Africa, 2025. This extractivist model, export raw, import finished, was a colonial design. And structural adjustment didn't dismantle it, it locked it in. When African countries tried to build their own industries, trade liberalization rules forced them to compete with subsidized Western manufacturers before their own industries could mature. Africa needs to create at least 20 million new jobs annually just to absorb its young population. The current system makes that nearly impossible. This isn't a story about laziness. It is not about culture or corruption alone. It is about architecture, a global financial architecture built during colonialism, reinforced in the 1980s, and still running today. African nations are not poor because they haven't worked hard enough. They are caught in a machine designed to extract, not to build. The debt trap, the colonial currency, the billions that vanish into offshore accounts every year. The rule that says you can sell your resources, but never your finished products. Understanding this isn't pessimism. It's the first step to changing it. The generation that burned their parliaments in Nairobi and marched through Dakar knows this. They're not asking for charity. They're asking for a fair game.